What happens when a man who has everything tries to give a $5,000 tip to a woman who has nothing? You'd expect gratitude, tears, maybe even a bow. But what billionaire Arthur Kensington got instead was a cold, hard no. This one word from a tired waitress in a greasy spoon diner ignited a fury in him that would set him on a path of obsession. He vowed to uncover her secret, to break her pride. But he never imagined that the truth he was digging for wasn't about her at all. It was about him, his late wife, and a devastating secret that had been saving a life all along. The rain fell on the gleaming black hood of the Rolls-Royce Phantom in perfectly formed beads, each one a tiny, distorted reflection of the dreary Manhattan street. Inside, insulated from the weather and the world, Arthur Kensington stared out at the diner. The corner spoon. The sign was a faded relic from another era, its neon tubing flickering erratically. It was the kind of place he hadn't set foot in for 30 years, the kind of place he had built an empire to escape. "Are you sure about this, sir?" asked his driver, a man named Marcus, whose face was perpetually etched with polite concern. "I could have a reservation at Le Bernardin in 20 minutes. "I'm sure." Arthur grunted, his eyes fixed on the diner's steamy windows. It was a whim, a ghost of a memory. His late wife Amelia had loved places like this before he had gilded their lives beyond recognition. She said they had more soul. Arthur now believed soul was just another word for struggle. He stepped out of the car, the collar of his $1,000 cashmere coat turned up against the drizzle. The moment he pushed open the diner's door, a bell chimed weakly, and the smell of stale coffee, sizzling bacon and bleach assaulted his senses. It was a smell from his past, and not a welcome one. He took a booth by the window, the vinyl cracked and patched with silver duct tape. A waitress approached, her movements economical and weary. She was maybe in her late 30s with dark, tired eyes that held a surprising depth. Her brown hair was pulled back in a severe ponytail, and her uniform was clean but frayed at the cuffs. Her name tag read Elena. "Coffee?" she asked, her voice low with a faint, unplaceable accent. "Black," Arthur said, barely looking up from his phone, where stock tickers scrolled in an endless hypnotic river of green and red. She brought the coffee in a thick, white ceramic mug. It was bitter and too hot, but he drank it anyway. He ordered a simple breakfast, 2 eggs, toast, bacon. The food came quickly. It was unremarkable fuel for the common man. He ate mechanically, his mind 1,000 miles away, calculating profit margins on a new acquisition in Singapore. When he was done, Elena cleared his plates without a word. She was efficient, almost invisible, which was how he liked his service. He was about to leave when he remembered the reason he'd come. Amelia. He imagined her sitting across from him, smiling, telling him to see the people. A surge of something grief, guilt, or maybe just ego welled up inside him. He would do something Amelia would have approved of. He would be generous. He pulled out his wallet, a slim piece of alligator leather. He thumbed past the $100 bills and pulled out the entire contents of his cash clip, 50 crisp $100 bills, $5,000. He laid the stack neatly on the table beside the $10 check. He stood up, feeling a familiar surge of power, the satisfaction of a grand gesture. He would walk out, and she would discover it. Her day, her month, maybe even her year would be made. He, Arthur Kensington, had descended from his Olympus to bestow a blessing. He was almost at the door when her voice cut through the diner's quiet hum. "Sir," he turned. Elena was standing by his table, the stack of cash held delicately between her thumb and forefinger, as if it were contaminated. "You forgot this," she said. Her expression was not one of gratitude or shock. It was unnervingly neutral. Arthur chuckled a dry, dismissive sound. "That's not forgotten. It's for you. A tip." He expected her to stammer, to blush, to be overwhelmed. Instead, her dark eyes met his, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of steel in them. "I can't accept this." The air in the diner seemed to thicken. The short-order cook paused his spatula, hovering over the grill. Arthur felt a prickle of annoyance. "What do you mean you can't accept it? It's a tip." "For your service." "My service is worth a percentage of the check, sir." "Not this," she said, gesturing with the money. "This isn't a tip. It's something else." His annoyance began to curdle into anger. Who was this woman to question his motives, to refuse his generosity? "It's whatever I say it is. Take the money." His voice was low and commanding, the voice he used to close billion-dollar deals. "No, thank you," she said, her voice quiet but unyielding. She placed the stack of bills back on the table. "Your check is $10.57. You can leave $20 if you feel my service was excellent." The audacity was breathtaking. He felt his face flush with heat. It was a public refusal, a rejection not just of his money, but of him, of the power he represented. He who could buy this entire city block and have it bulldozed before breakfast was being lectured on the etiquette of tipping by a waitress in a rundown diner. "Listen to me," he snarled, stepping closer to the table. "I don't know what kind of game you're playing, but I am trying to do something nice for you. You look like you could use it." He gestured around the shabby diner, a clear insult. A flicker of hurt crossed her face, so quick he almost missed it, but it was immediately replaced by a look of fierce, unshakable pride. "What I need is not for you to decide, sir. I will not take it." "Everyone has a price," he shot back, his voice rising. "What's yours? Is this not enough? You want 10,000. My price is my dignity," she said, her voice trembling slightly with suppressed emotion. "And it's not for sale. Not for $5,000, not for $1 million. Now please, either pay your check or I will call the police." The word police hung in the air like a slap. Arthur Kensington threatened with the police in a greasy spoon. The absurdity, the sheer humiliation of it was blinding. He snatched the money from the table, his hand shaking with rage. He threw a $20 bill down. It fluttered to the worn linoleum floor. "Keep the change," he spat, his voice dripping with venom. He turned and stormed out of the diner, the weak chime of the bell sounding like mocking laughter. As he slammed himself into the back of the Rolls-Royce, the rain beginning to pour in earnest, he wasn't thinking about business or acquisitions. He was consumed by a singular burning thought. He would find out who Helena was, and he would break her. He would discover her weakness, the chink in her armor of pride, and he would exploit it until she begged for the charity she had so arrogantly thrown back in his face. The game was on. The drive back to his penthouse, a glass palace overlooking Central Park, did nothing to cool Arthur's temper. The fury that had ignited in the diner now burned with a steady, obsessive heat. It was no longer about the money. The $5,000 was an insignificant sum, less than he'd spend on a bottle of wine without a second thought. It was about the principle. The world, as Arthur Kensington understood it, operated on a simple transactional basis. Effort produced capital. Capital produced power. Power allowed one to shape reality. His reality. For the waitress, Elena, to reject that power was to reject the very foundation of his universe. It was an anomaly, a bug in the system, and his mind, trained to solve complex problems, could not let it go. He strode into his cavernous office, the city's skyline, his wallpaper. "David!" he bellowed. His assistant, David Chen, a sharp young man with an MBA from Wharton and an unflappable demeanor, appeared in the doorway almost instantly. Yes, Mr. Kensington. I need you to find someone. Her name is Eleanor. She's a waitress at a diner called The Corner Spoon on Lexington and 28th. David's eyebrows rose a fraction of an inch, the only sign of his surprise. Find her. In what capacity, sir? I want to know everything, Arthur said, pacing in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows. Where she lives, who her family is, where she's from. I want to know her debts, her fears, her weaknesses. I want to know why a woman working for minimum wage would turn down $5,000 cash. David hesitated. Sir, with respect, this sounds personal. Are you sure you want to expend resources on this? Arthur whirled around, his eyes blazing. I want a full workup. Hire whoever you need to. I want a report on my desk by tomorrow morning. Do you understand? Yes, Mr. Kensington. David set his professional mask back in place. He made a discreet note on his tablet and vanished. Arthur spent the rest of the day in a state of agitated distraction. He snapped at his division heads during a conference call and dismissed a multi-million-dollar marketing proposal with a wave of his hand. His focus was singular. Who was Elena? Was she part of a scam? Perhaps she and the cook were running some kind of confidence game, preying on wealthy patrons. But that made no sense. She had refused the money. Was she mentally unstable, or was she impossibly, simply, what she appeared to be a woman with an incomprehensible, infuriating sense of pride? The next morning, a sleek, encrypted file appeared on his desktop. It was from a discreet private investigation firm, one he kept on retainer for corporate espionage. David had been efficient. Arthur opened the file. Elena Petrova. The name stared back at him. Age 38. Citizen since 2015. Originally from Sofia, Bulgaria. No criminal record. No known affiliations with any political or religious groups. It was a disappointingly ordinary profile. He scrolled down. She lived in a small, rent-controlled apartment in Astoria, Queens. A 2-hour commute by subway and bus from the diner. The report noted she worked 2 jobs, breakfast and lunch shifts at the Corner Spoon, and 4 evenings a week cleaning offices in a midtown skyscraper. Her estimated annual income was just under $38,000. Then he saw the section on her family. Single, no husband on record. But she wasn't alone. Dependents. 1. Leo Petrova. Son. Age 7. A son. The first real detail that felt like a crack in her armor. A child was a vulnerability. A child had needs, wants. A child cost money. The report included a grainy surveillance photo of Eleanor leaving her apartment building, holding the hand of a small boy with a pale face and large, dark eyes, like his mother's. He wore a knitted cap, even though the photo was taken in early autumn. Arthur leaned closer to the screen. Something was wrong. He kept scrolling past financial records, showing a mountain of debt not to credit card companies or loan sharks, but to a single entity, New York Presbyterian Hospital. The investigator's notes were blunt. Subject's son, Leo Petrova, is a patient at the hospital's pediatric oncology unit, diagnosed 2 years ago with stage 4 neuroblastoma, a rare and aggressive childhood cancer. Prognosis. Guarded. The air went out of Arthur's lungs. Cancer. This wasn't a game. This wasn't about pride or some elaborate scam. This was about a mother fighting for her son's life. A wave of something complex and uncomfortable washed over him. It wasn't pity, not yet. It was a cold, calculating understanding. The pieces of the puzzle were rearranging themselves in his mind. Her exhaustion wasn't just from working 2 jobs. It was the bone-deep weariness of a parent living on the precipice of loss. Her fierceness wasn't arrogance. It was the desperate defense of a mother protecting her cub. But the central mystery remained now deeper and more maddening than before. If her son was sick, If she was drowning in medical debt, why in God's name would she refuse the money? It made less sense now, not more. Pride was a luxury people in her position couldn't afford. She wasn't just being proud. She was being irresponsible. She was letting her son suffer because she couldn't swallow her pride and accept help. The anger returned, but it had changed. It was no longer the hot rage of a bruised ego. It was a colder, more righteous fury. He saw her not as an adversary to be broken, but as a problem to be solved, whether she liked it or not. He had the answer. He knew her weakness. It was her son. He would go to the hospital. He wouldn't offer her cash this time. He would go over her head. He would find the head of the department, write a check so large it would make their heads spin and cover all of Leo's medical expenses. Anonymously, of course. She would never have to know it was him. She would be forced to accept his help, and he would have his victory. He would prove that his money, his power, could fix anything, even a stubborn woman's pride. He picked up his phone and called David. "Get me the name of the head of pediatric oncology at New York Presbyterian, and get the car ready. I'm going to the hospital." He was going to save this woman's son, and in doing so, he was going to win. The pediatric oncology ward of New York Presbyterian was a world away from Arthur Kensington's sterile, sky-high office. The air smelled of antiseptic fear and a cloying, artificial cheerfulness. The walls were painted with cartoon animals whose bright smiles felt jarringly out of place. Here, money was not an abstract concept on a screen. It was the silent, desperate prayer whispered by parents in waiting rooms, the subtext of every conversation with a doctor. Arthur, dressed in a tailored Brioni suit, was an alien in this environment. He moved through the hallways with a sense of grim purpose, ignoring the curious and weary glances from parents and nurses. He had an appointment with Dr. Annabelle Foster, the department head, arranged by David with the promise of a significant philanthropic inquiry. Dr. Foster's office was small and cluttered with medical journals and crayon drawings taped to a corkboard. She was a woman in her 50s, with kind eyes that had seen too much and a handshake that was surprisingly firm. "Mr. Kensington," she said, gesturing for him to sit. "Thank you for coming. Your assistant mentioned you had an interest in our work here." "I do," Arthur said, getting straight to the point. "I want to make a donation, a substantial one, but it comes with a condition." Dr. Foster's professional smile tightened slightly. "We are, of course, immensely grateful for any support, but our treatment protocols are determined by medical need, not donor requests." "My request isn't about treatment," Arthur clarified. "It's about a specific patient, a boy named Leo Petrova." The doctor's expression became guarded. "I'm sorry, but patient confidentiality prevents me from discussing. I want to cover his bills." Arthur interrupted, his impatience showing. "All of them. Past, present, and future. I will establish a fund, an endowment, whatever it takes. I want him to have access to any trial, any specialist, anywhere in the world on my dime. The condition is that it remains completely anonymous. His mother, Elena, is never to know the source." Dr. Foster stared at him for a long moment, her gaze analytical. She was no stranger to wealthy benefactors, but they usually wanted their names on a plaque. This was different. "Mr. Kensington," she said slowly, choosing her words with care. "Leo's financial situation is complicated, but he is already receiving the best possible care. He's in a clinical trial, I assume," Arthur pressed, recalling the investigator's report. "Yes, a very promising one focused on targeted immunotherapy for high-risk neuroblastoma. It's an experimental treatment, and it's yielding remarkable results for patients like Leo." "And it's expensive," Arthur stated. Extremely, she admitted. The research, the medication, the specialized staff. It runs into the millions per patient. But Leo's place in the trial is secure. His costs are covered. Arthur leaned back, a smug sense of satisfaction settling in. Covered by the hospital's charity fund, no doubt. A fund I am now prepared to replenish tenfold. Dr. Foster shook her head. No, not by the hospital. The trial itself and all associated patient costs are fully funded by a private grant. A very specific, very generous one from an organization called the Amelia Foundation. The name hit Arthur like a physical blow. Amelia. His breath caught in his throat. It had to be a coincidence. A cruel, impossibly painful coincidence. Amelia had been his wife's name. The Amelia Foundation. He repeated, his voice sounding distant to his own ears. Yes, Dr. Foster continued, oblivious to the storm raging inside him. They've been our largest benefactor for this specific research for the past 5 years. An incredible organization. Very private, insistent on anonymity. Their funding has single-handedly kept this program alive. It has saved lives, Mr. Kensington. Leo Petrova is alive today because of the Amelia Foundation. Arthur felt the room begin to tilt. He had started a foundation in Amelia's name after she passed away, the Amelia Kensington Foundation, as a way to manage her estate's charitable obligations. It was a tax shelter, a public relations tool. He signed the checks, but he had no idea where the money actually went. David and a team of wealth managers handled the philanthropic portfolio, as they called it. They identified promising tax-deductible causes and made donations. It was just another part of his financial empire. He had never considered it real. He had never imagined it touching actual lives. Could it be, was it possible that his foundation, the one he treated as an afterthought, was the anonymous benefactor? He felt a sudden desperate need to see her, to see Elena, to see the woman whose life was unknowingly entangled with his own in this bizarre, ironic twist of fate. "Where is he?" Arthur asked, his voice strained. "The boy. Where is his room?" "Mr. Kensington, I really can't." "I'm not going to speak to them," he lied, standing up abruptly. "I just want to walk by. Please." There was a raw urgency in his voice that made Dr. Foster relent. She gave him the room number, her expression, a mixture of confusion and concern. Arthur walked down the hall, his heart pounding a strange, unfamiliar rhythm in his chest. He stopped outside room 308. The door was slightly ajar. He could hear a soft voice inside, speaking in a language he didn't recognize, Bulgarian, he presumed. He peered through the crack. The room was small, dominated by a hospital bed, filled with machines that beeped and whirred softly. In the bed was the boy Leo. He was small for his age, his skin translucent, his head bald from chemotherapy. But he was smiling, and sitting on the edge of the bed, reading to him from a colorful picture book, was Eleanor. She was transformed. The weary, defensive waitress from the diner was gone. In her place was a mother, her face illuminated by a love so fierce and so tender it was almost painful to witness. She wasn't just reading, she was performing, making funny voices for the characters, her hands gesturing dramatically. Leo giggled a weak but genuine sound of pure joy. In that moment, Arthur saw it all. He saw why she had refused his money. His tip wasn't a gift. It was an insult. It was pity money thrown at her by a rich man who saw her as a pathetic creature to be saved. But she wasn't pathetic. She was a warrior. She was fighting the most important battle in the world, and she was doing it with a grace and dignity he couldn't even comprehend. To accept his tip would have been to admit that her struggle was just about money. But it was about so much more. It was about preserving a sliver of normalcy for her son, about showing him that even in this sterile world of sickness, there was still joy and strength. Accepting a stranger's pity would have tainted that. He, Arthur Kensington, had walked into her life and tried to reduce her epic struggle to a simple financial transaction he could solve. He hadn't been offering help. He had been asserting his dominance, and she had rightly thrown it back in his face. He backed away from the door, a profound sense of shame washing over him. He had come here for a victory to prove his power. Instead, he had been utterly and completely humbled. He turned and walked away, not back to Dr. Foster's office, but towards the exit. He needed to go home. He needed to open the door to a room he hadn't entered in 2 years. He needed to find out the truth about the Amelia Foundation. The silence of the penthouse was different this time. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of a sanctuary, but the heavy, suffocating silence of an empty tomb. Arthur walked past the vast living room with its curated art and panoramic views, his footsteps echoing on the marble floors. He headed for a hallway. He usually avoided a wing of the apartment that had been sealed off not by locks, but by his own grief. At the end of the hall was a simple oak door. Amelia's study. After she had died from a sudden aneurysm 2 years ago, he had ordered the room left exactly as it was. He couldn't bear to touch her things, and he couldn't bear to see them. So he had simply closed the door, and in doing so had closed the door on a part of himself. His hand trembled as he reached for the cool brass knob. He pushed the door open. The air inside was still and thick with the scent of old paper, dried lavender, and the faint, lingering perfume that had been uniquely hers. Dust motes danced in the single beam of afternoon light slanting through the window. The room was a reflection of Amelia herself, elegant, understated, and deeply personal. Bookshelves overflowed, not with collector's editions, but with well-read paperbacks. Her desk, a beautiful antique cherry wood piece, was orderly but not sterile. A stack of letters was held by a smooth grey stone from a beach they had visited in Maine. A framed photo of the two of them, younger and beaming on their wedding day, sat in the corner. For a moment he was paralyzed by a fresh wave of grief. It felt like an intrusion, a desecration to be in here on his ugly errand. But the image of Eleanor and Leo, the name of the foundation, it pushed him forward. On the corner of the desk sat a laptop, Amelia's. He wondered if it would even turn on. He found the power cord and plugged it in. To his surprise, it booted up asking for a password. He tried her birthday. Denied. Their anniversary. Denied. He felt a pang of frustration, and then he remembered. A silly little inside joke between them. He typed, "Just keep swimming." The desktop flickered to life. The background was a photo of a field of sunflowers in Tuscany. Her folders were meticulously organized. He scanned the names: Book Club, Garden Plans, Charity Galas. Then he saw it. A folder simply labeled Foundation. He clicked it open. Inside were dozens of subfolders, spreadsheets and documents. It was the entire operational history of the Amelia Foundation. He had thought it was something he created for her in her memory. He was wrong. It was something she had created for herself. He opened a file named Mission Statement. It wasn't the corporate jargon his own people had drafted for the Kensington Foundation website. It was Amelia's voice, clear and passionate. The Amelia Foundation is dedicated to funding innovative and under-the-radar research initiatives with a focus on high-risk, low-survivability pediatric cancers. We believe in providing hope where there is little by investing in the brilliant minds that conventional funding often overlooks. Our support is to remain anonymous to ensure that the focus remains on the science and the children, not on the benefactor. He felt a chill run down his spine. This was her work, her secret passion. While he was out conquering the world, building his monuments of glass and steel, she had been quietly, diligently building this a legacy of hope. He delved deeper, opening financial statements. He saw the initial endowment. He had given her a large block of stock years ago as a birthday present, telling her to have some fun with it. He had assumed she'd bought jewelry or art. Instead, she had used it to seed this foundation. She had grown it with shrewd, careful investments, her portfolio outperforming his own in some quarters. Then he found the grants folder. The top file was labeled NYP, Neuroblastoma Initiative. He opened it. It was all there. The initial grant proposal from Dr. Foster 5 years ago. The annual renewal requests. Budgets progress, reports, scientific data. And correspondence. His heart hammered against his ribs as he opened a subfolder titled Patient Impact Stories. The Foundation, while anonymous to the hospital administration, invited families in the trial to share their stories if they wished to a blind P.O. box. It was a way for Amelia to feel connected to the lives she was changing. The folder was full of letters and photos. He clicked on the most recent one. The file name was Petrova Jewel. An email opened. The text was simple, written in slightly formal English that spoke of a non-native speaker. To the director of the Amelia Foundation. My name is Elena Petrova. I am writing to you because I do not know how else to say my thanks. There are no words in my language, or this one that can say what is in my heart. My son Leo has neuroblastoma. For a year, the doctors told us there were no more options. They told us to make him comfortable. We were in the dark. We had no hope. Then we were told about this clinical trial, the one your foundation makes possible. They said it was a chance. A small one, but a chance. For a mother, a small chance is the whole world. Today, my Leo is still with me. He laughs. He reads his books. The tumors are smaller. The doctors use the word remission. I do not know what the future will bring, but you have given me the present. You have given my son back to me one day at a time. I will never know who you are, but I will pray for you every night, for the rest of my life. You are an angel on this earth. Thank you. Thank you for my son's life. Sincerely, Elena Petrova. Attached to the email was a photograph. It was Leo, not in a hospital bed, but sitting on a park bench, a genuine toothy grin on his face. He looked happy. He looked alive. Arthur Kensington stared at the screen, the words blurring through a sudden film of tears. The immense crushing weight of the truth descended upon him. The money he had so arrogantly thrown on the table at the diner was a pittance, an insult. The real charity, the life-saving, soul-altering act of grace, had already been given. It had been given by his wife, the woman he thought he knew, who had been operating in a sphere of quiet, profound humanity he had never even bothered to look for. His rage at Elena, his obsessive need to break her, his grand egotistical plan to save her, it was all a monstrous joke. He hadn't been her potential savior. He was a clueless buffoon, ignorant of the fact that his own wife's love and foresight were the only reasons Eleanor's world hadn't already collapsed. Eleanor hadn't been refusing his charity. She had been unknowingly living by it. He slumped forward, his head in his hands, and for the first time since Amelia's funeral, he wept. He wept for his lost wife, for the beautiful secret life she had led without him. He wept for his own staggering arrogance, his blindness, He had been a rich man standing on a mountain of gold, completely oblivious to the true treasure that had been beside him all along. And now he had to face the woman he had bullied, the woman he had tried to humiliate, and somehow explain the impossible truth that connected them. 2 days passed before Arthur could muster the courage to act. He spent the time in Amelia's study, reading every document, every letter, every scientific report. He was immersing himself in his wife's world, a world of empathy and purpose that felt both foreign and deeply familiar. He was a man adrift, and his wife's legacy was the only lighthouse in the fog. He knew he couldn't send an assistant. He couldn't summon Eleanor to his office. He had to go back to where it all began. He had to go back to the corner spoon. He didn't take the Rolls-Royce. He took a simple black town car and had the driver drop him off a block away. He wore a simple dark sweater and slacks, leaving the expensive watch and cufflinks in his drawer. He felt like an imposter in his own life. He pushed open the diner door, the bell chiming just as it had before. The mid-afternoon lull had set in. The place was nearly empty. Elena was at the counter, methodically refilling salt and pepper shakers, her back to the door. "Elena," he said. His voice was quiet, hoarse. She froze. Her shoulders tensed before she turned around slowly. When her eyes met his, they were filled with a cold, weary dread. She clearly expected another confrontation, another assault on her dignity. "What do you want?" she asked, her voice flat, devoid of emotion. She placed a shaker down with a sharp click, a small act of defiance. I came to apologize." He began the words, feeling clumsy and inadequate. "For my behavior the other day. It was inexcusable, arrogant, vile. There is no excuse." She watched him, her expression unreadable. She didn't grant him the relief of an immediate response. She just waited, forcing him to continue. "I was wrong," he said, taking a step closer. "Completely and utterly wrong. About everything. An apology is not necessary," she said, her voice still clipped. "I would just like you to leave me alone. Please, I don't want any trouble." "I know, but I can't leave. Not until I explain," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "This is going to sound impossible, but you have to hear me out." He reached into the simple canvas satchel he was carrying and pulled out a file folder. Her eyes darted to it, suspicious. "This isn't about money," he said, quickly seeing her fear. "Not in the way you think." He opened the folder on the counter between them. He turned it so she could see. The first page was the mission statement for the Amelia Foundation. "Do you know what this is?" he asked gently. She shook her head, confused. "It's a private foundation, one that funds medical research." He watched her face for any sign of recognition, but there was none. "Specifically, it's the primary funder for a clinical trial for pediatric neuroblastoma at New York Presbyterian." Her breath hitched. Her eyes, which had been so guarded, widened in shock. How do you know this?" "Because Amelia," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "was my wife." The diner fell into a profound silence, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator. Elena stared at him, her mind clearly struggling to connect the pieces. The arrogant billionaire who had insulted her and the anonymous angel who had saved her son were connected. "Your wife," she whispered. "She passed away 2 years ago." Arthur continued, his gaze dropping to the counter. "She started the foundation years before that. It was her passion, her secret project. I honestly didn't know the extent of it. I didn't know where the money went. I was too busy, too ignorant." He slid another paper out of the folder and pushed it across the counter. It was the printout of her email. her letter of thanks. Elena looked down. She saw her own words, her own prayer of gratitude addressed to a faceless benefactor. And now the face was here in front of her, the face of the man she despised. Tears welled in her eyes, tears of confusion, shock, and a dawning, overwhelming understanding. "When I left here the other day," Arthur said, his voice raw with shame, "I was furious. I couldn't understand you, so I had you investigated. It was a monstrous thing to do, a violation of your privacy, and I am deeply sorry for it. That's how I found out about Leo. That's what led me to the hospital and to the foundation." He finally dared to meet her eyes. "You have to believe me, Elena. I had no idea. The money I tried to give you, it was from my ego. It was meaningless. The real gift, the one that mattered, was from her. It was her love, her foresight. Not mine. All this time, you have been living under the protection of her legacy, and I was too blind to even see it." Elena sank onto a nearby stool, her legs giving way. She put her hand to her mouth, a sob escaping. It wasn't a sob of sadness, but of release. The release of years of tension, of fighting alone, of praying into the void. The void now had a name. Amelia. "She saved him," Elena whispered through her tears. "When everyone else said to stop, she saved him." "Yes," Arthur said, his own tears falling freely now. "She did." They stood there for a long time, two strangers from different worlds, bound by the ghost of a woman they had both loved in their own way, one as a husband, the other as the recipient of her ultimate kindness. The anger and pride that had defined their conflict dissolved, replaced by a shared grief and a staggering sense of wonder at the invisible threads that connect human lives. In the quiet of the empty diner, surrounded by the smell of coffee and bacon, a new understanding was being forged. Arthur Kensington, the man who thought he could buy anything, was finally learning the value of something that was truly priceless. And Elena Petrova, the woman who thought she was all alone in her fight, was realizing she had a powerful unseen guardian all along. The truth hadn't just changed everything. It had broken everything down to build something new and far more beautiful in its place. The days that followed the confession at the diner were a period of profound and quiet transformation for both Arthur and Elena. The chasm between their worlds had been bridged by the memory of Amelia. Arthur threw himself into understanding the foundation not as a line item in his portfolio, but as a living entity. He spent hours with the foundation's director, a compassionate woman named Grace, who had worked closely with Amelia for years. Grace, who had only known Arthur as a distant, intimidating signature on a check, now saw a broken man trying to piece together a puzzle of the woman he had loved, but had never fully known. Amelia believed in quiet impact, Grace explained, sitting with Arthur in the foundation's modest office. She used to say, "Loud charity is for the giver. Quiet charity is for the receiver." She never wanted her name on a building. She wanted her resources inside it, working miracles. Arthur learned of other projects. Amelia had funded a literacy program for immigrant children in the Bronx, a shelter for women fleeing domestic violence, a scholarship for aspiring classical musicians from low-income families. Each project was a reflection of her values, a testament to a life lived with deep, unheralded purpose. His entire perception of his own legacy, built on skyscrapers and stock prices, felt hollow in comparison. He made his first visit to the pediatric oncology ward as a different man. He wasn't Mr. Kensington, the potential donor. He was Arthur Amelia's husband. Elena met him there not as a waitress, but as a fellow traveler on this difficult journey. He saw Leo again this time, not through a crack in the door, but up close. The boy was shy at first, dwarfed by Arthur's tall frame. Arthur, who had never been comfortable around children, felt an awkward helplessness. "He loves stories about dragons," Elena prompted softly. Arthur, fumbling for something to say, found himself talking about a business trip to China and seeing the dragon kites over the Forbidden City. Leo's eyes lit up. For a few minutes, he wasn't a cancer patient. He was just a little boy, captivated by a tale of adventure. It was the first genuine, unforced connection Arthur had made with another human being in years. A new routine began to form. Arthur would visit the hospital a few times a week. He didn't bring extravagant gifts. He brought books. He brought interesting takeout for Elena, knowing she often skipped meals. They would sit in the drab hospital cafeteria talking. She told him about her life in Bulgaria, her dreams of being a botanist, the terror of Leo's diagnosis. He in turn told her about Amelia, not the society wife, but the funny, intelligent woman who could beat him at chess and who loved sunflowers. They were building a friendship out of the ashes of their shared loss and shared hope. One afternoon, as Leo was sleeping, Elena looked at Arthur across the small hospital room. "What you did," she said, "coming to me at the diner to tell me the truth. It must have been the hardest thing you have ever done." Arthur considered it. "No," he said after a moment. "The hardest thing was living for 2 years without realizing what I had lost. Not just my wife, but the best part of myself. She was my conscience, and I never even knew it." He knew then what he had to do. His wealth was not his own power source. It was a resource that Amelia had shown him how to use. The grand gestures had to stop. The real work had to begin. He called David Chen into his office. "Liquidate the holdings in the Mercer acquisition," he ordered. David was stunned. "Sir, that's a $40 million profit." "I know," Arthur said. "Transfer the full amount to the Amelia Foundation and cancel my order for the new jet and sell the summer house in the Hamptons. Put all of it into the foundation's endowment." "Mr. Kensington," David said, his voice laced with concern, "what is your goal here?" Arthur looked out the window, not at the skyline of his empire, but past it, as if seeing something else entirely. "My goal," he said, "is to become the man my wife always knew I could be." He wasn't just funding the foundation anymore. He was becoming its heart. He met with Dr. Foster and the research team not as a financier, but as a student. He learned the science behind the treatments, the names of the children in the trial. He was no longer just signing checks. He was shouldering the legacy his wife had so lovingly built. Elena, in turn, found a new strength. The constant grinding fear for Leo's life was still there, but it was no longer a solitary burden. She had an ally. The foundation through Arthur provided a support network she'd never had. When the hospital's social worker mentioned that Elena's apartment building was being sold and she would likely be forced to move, Arthur acted swiftly but discreetly. The foundation purchased a small condo in a quiet, safe neighborhood much closer to the hospital. It was put in a trust for Leo, with Elena as the lifelong resident. When Elena protested, overwhelmed by the generosity, Arthur simply said, "Amelia would have wanted Leo to have a garden." The condo had a small patch of dirt out back. It wasn't charity. It was a partnership. Eleanor, with her first-hand experience of the patient journey, became an invaluable advisor to the foundation, helping to shape new programs that supported families, not just patients. She was no longer just a recipient of its grace. She was becoming one of its stewards. Their lives, once set on a collision course by pride and misunderstanding, were now inextricably linked, united by a shared purpose to ensure that Amelia's light continued to shine in the darkest of places. A year later, the autumn sun cast long shadows across a small, vibrant garden. Marigolds and asters bloomed in a riot of color, and a small but determined tomato plant still clung to a few ripening fruits. Leo Petrova, now 8 years old, dug in the soil with a small trowel. His hair had grown back a thick, dark mop that fell into his eyes. His cheeks were fuller, and his laughter, once a fragile, precious sound, was now robust and frequent. He wasn't cured. Neuroblastoma was a patient, relentless disease, but he was in a strong, stable remission. He was going to school. He was living. Elena watched him from a small bench, a serene smile on her face. She was no longer wearing a waitress uniform. She was dressed in a simple smart blouse and trousers on her way to a board meeting for the Amelia Foundation, where she now served as the patient and family advocate. Her voice, once hushed and weary, now carried the confident weight of purpose. The gate to the garden creaked open, and Arthur Kensington walked in. He looked different. The severe tailored suits were gone, replaced by a comfortable jacket and chinos. The tense, predatory energy that had once surrounded him had dissipated, replaced by a quiet calm. The lines of stress on his face had softened. "Look, Arthur," Leo shouted, holding up a wriggling earthworm. "I found a dragon's noodle." Arthur chuckled a warm, genuine sound. "A mighty fine specimen, Sir Leo. Be careful he doesn't breathe fire on you." He sat down on the bench next to Elena. For a few moments, they sat in comfortable silence, watching the boy play. Their friendship was now an easy, settled thing, built on a foundation of shared grief and mutual respect. There was no romance between them, but something deeper, a familial bond forged in the crucible of crisis and grace. "Dr. Foster called this morning," Arthur said quietly. "The latest round of funding has allowed them to expand the trial. They're accepting 20 new children next month." "Amelia would be so happy," Elena said, her gaze distant and fond. "She would be," Arthur agreed. He looked around the small garden, a tiny oasis of life tucked away in the vastness of New York City. "I spent my whole life trying to build an empire to put my name on things. I thought that's what a legacy was. Towers companies, billions of dollars." He shook his head, a small self-deprecating smile playing on his lips. "But I was wrong. This is a legacy." He gestured to Leo, who was now carefully reburying the earthworm. "One laughing child, a garden, a second chance. This is the stuff that actually matters." He had learned the hardest lesson of his life, that true power isn't the ability to buy anything you want, but the ability to give what someone truly needs. It wasn't about the grand public gesture, but the quiet, anonymous act of grace. He was no longer the sole owner of Kensington Industries. He was the humble caretaker of Amelia's garden. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the scene, Leo ran over to them, his face smudged with dirt. He hugged his mother. Then, to Arthur's surprise, he threw his arms around Arthur's neck as well. "Thank you for helping my mum," the boy whispered into his ear. Arthur's breath caught. He hugged the boy back tightly, overwhelmed by a sense of gratitude so profound it felt like a physical ache in his chest. He looked over Leo's shoulder at Elena. Her eyes were shining with tears, but she was smiling. In that small, perfect moment, the story came full circle. The arrogant billionaire, the proud waitress, the sick child. They were no longer defined by those roles. They were a family of a kind, a family brought together by the enduring legacy of a woman whose quiet love had turned out to be the most powerful force of all, a force that could heal wounds, build bridges, and in a small garden in Queens, make flowers grow in the most unlikely of soil. The story of Arthur and Elena reminds us of a powerful truth. the most important transactions in our lives have nothing to do with money. It shows us that beneath the surface of our daily interactions, there are hidden stories of struggle, of dignity, and of incredible strength. Arthur thought he was offering charity, but Amelia's legacy taught him about true generosity, a generosity that is quiet, empathetic, and seeks to empower, not to control. Elena's fierce pride wasn't an obstacle. It was the armor she wore to protect her son's world. Their journey shows that it's never too late to change, to listen, and to learn that our greatest legacy isn't what we build for ourselves, but what we quietly nurture for others. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like this video and share it with someone who might need to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real-life stories that explore the depths of the human heart. What did you think of Arthur's transformation? Let us know in the comments below. Thank you for listening.